Here we go. What up, though? Dwayne M. Barnes, DM, as you see here, back for another week at AAS 477. Coming at you on a different date this week. We're usually here on Wednesdays at 7. Well, yesterday was my birthday. Shout out to Virgo, shout out to September, shout out to the fall, shout out to my boys on both sides, the Wolverines and the Tigers, as they try to, keep the momentum up in Michigan, try to, establish something this season. But I had a great birthday weekend, Labor Day weekend, and so I had to push it back one day. So we're here today. I want to jump right into it, but before I do that, I want to ensure I thank everybody for joining us. It's going to be a really good conversation. This is the third week. Well, technically, it's the third. I call it our first week, week 0 of AAS 477 Black Power, where we are looking at the Black Power era of 1968 through 1980, with a specific kind of focus on the Black Panthers, blaxploitation movies, the transition from soul to funk, the rise of African American elected officials, and everything else in between. Week 0 was a primer to get you caught up from our first class, which was AAS 477 Economics of Jim Crow, where we went from Reconstruction all the way to 1954. The second class that I did, which was 10 classes, was AAS 477 Power and Protest, where we looked at the civil rights movement from 1954 all the way to 1968. And this is my third class here, AAS 477 Black Power, the Fight for Black Liberation, Black Power. Week 0, we got caught up. Week 1, we set the basis for kind of the Black Power ideology, starting all the way back from our first class, all the people who kind of contributed to that, kind of leaning in heavily on Stokely Carmichael and his birth of the term Black Power at the 1966 March Against Fear, which was initially led by James Meredith. And today we are going to dig into the Panthers. So the Panthers brought a totally different face to Black Power and to protest. They were young, Black, militant, organized, politically sophisticated, and they were armed. This week, we're going to look at the revolutionaries that captured the attention of America and caught the full force of the American government as well. We're also going to catch up on, well, let me take a step back. We're going to look specifically at Dr. Huey P. Newton and his 10-point platform and program, and we're going to spend a lot of time, well, not a lot of time, we're going to spend enough time on that to get a foundation and set a basis for our discussion here today. Then we're going to catch up on Amiri Baraka and the rise of the Black Arts Movement, and we're going to talk a bit about the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, and CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, how they were moving under their new leadership. So what we're doing in this course is we're moving a lot of things forward at the same time. So each class, you're going to see what was going on in the Black Power scene, what was going on in the Black Arts Movement, what was going on in civil rights at that time, the people who were still on the civil rights tip, and it was a lot, still doing that, what was going on in entertainment, what was going on in the culture, etc. So we're doing all these things together, and my hope is to continue to keep us moving forward down the train. So let's pull up. Let's see, I'm going to take this off my screen, and I'm going to pull up our two things, our timeline and our Black Power matrix. But I want to start with our timeline here. So our Black Power timeline started, in 1966 with a couple of different things happening. The Watts uprisings, SNCC's leadership shift, Stokely Carmichael playing a big role in that, the founding of the Black Panther Party in 1966. Let's see the other big thing. 67, the long hot summer, the uprisings in Detroit and Newark, and Newark, Detroit, Cleveland, and which led to the Kerner Commission, which was a study that the President LBJ put together to try to figure out what happened. We talked about that last week. And then finally, we talked about Dr. King's assassination and the riots that came after that, and some of the legislative arming that the government was doing to, one, stop the riots from happening again, but to also, target Black Power as it moved forward. in the laws, the omnibus crime. Well, no, not that one we talked about. Well, I'll get to that in a moment. So that's kind of just a quick rundown. I went deeper into it last week, so I want to kind of set that up. And then also I want to bring up our Black Power Matrix and go a little bit into that just as a quick refresher as we move forward here. And I think zooming is always a issue with this one because of the PDF. But we started with Frederick Douglass and his call for freedom as Black Power, Booker T. Washington and his call for self-determination and economic do for self. Then we looked at Garvey and his nationalist perspective, W.E.B. Du Bois and his talented 10th perspective. We went down to Dr. King and Malcolm X. Dr. King, his Black Power was through civil rights. Malcolm X, his was another nationalist, separatist, do for self kind of perspective. Stokely Carmichael with his Black Power, defining Black Power as a transition away from civil rights. And today we're going to get into Huey P. Newton and his 10-point platform. So just a quick cliff notes of how we got here. So that was my introduction. That was defining Black Power part 2. So I want to bring my deck up and then I'm going to move through it and I'm going to continue to talk about the class. So what you can get ready for today is defining Black Power. We're going to look at the ideology of Black Power through the historical context. Like I said, 68 to 80. We're going to look at some key organizations, SNCC, CORE, and the Black Panther Party, and the Black Arts Movement, which is a bit different because it wasn't just one centralized organization. It was a lot of people doing a lot of things in a lot of different places. And so we'll put an academic basis around it and a cultural basis around that. And then how the Panthers emerged. Typically, we talk about the anti-war movement with Vietnam and the Bloods, everything that was going on with the brothers in the Vietnam movement. We talk about COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program that was taking down a lot of the Black Power organizations and civil rights organizations over the year. But this time we're going to put a specific emphasis on the Panthers. So let's set a basis for this thing here. Let me pull it over. I didn't see if I have any. So if you have any questions, any feedback you want to provide, go ahead and drop it in the chat. This isn't a one-way conversation. This is a conversation for us to have together. So you can feel free to jump in the comments, say what up, though. Let me know you hear. Drop a 1 in there, and then anything you got to say during the conversation, let's do it. And don't forget to share and like this YouTube page so we can get it up and going. Or if you caught me on Facebook, then that's what's up too. So let's look at revolution ideology today. Black Power emerged from a radical departure from the integrationist approach, emphasizing self-determination, cultural pride, and political autonomy. Self-defense, which the Panthers laid their hat on and, scared America with. Community control the same way, the same thing the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was saying, the same thing Marcus Garvey was saying, Malcolm X was saying, Deacons of Defense, and a lot of others as well. And then cultural pride. And we'll talk about this more as we move forward. Cultural pride happened in a couple of different ways. There were, and it should lead me to my next slide here. Oh, no, that's later coming up. So there was, cultural pride in a couple of different ways. Cultural pride as being Black, just American Black, descendants of slaves, and the makers of the culture here, and connection to our Pan-African diasporic background as well. And so we'll talk about how in this era, and a lot of different eras, and even today are still issues and talk and things around that, but how cultural pride played a role in this movement. And the SWAT here, we kind of talked about that. Mass mobilization as a strength, youth, international solidarity, weaknesses and threats around the government, repression, COINTELPRO, the ops, as people will call them today, and then opportunities, where the urban uprisings, the anti-colonial movements, the media attention, and the electoral politics that served as an alternative. You don't want Huey and Bobby and them doing it. You might want to elect these folks and build the Congressional Black Congress and all those other things, or caucus and all those things. So again, Birth of the Black Power ideology, the Watts Rebellion, I buy that. And the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, which Stokely Carmichael in part helped organize during the Selma March and after. They were the first to use the Black Panther logo, which the Panthers later adopted. 1966, again, Stokely Carmichael popularized the term Black Power during a speech. And, from 66 to 67, the transition from civil rights rhetoric to more Black Power aggressive rhetoric. So Dr. Huey P. Newton and his 10-point platform, I want to take a moment and I want to share, and I may have a problem here with my with the zooming like I had earlier, but let's see. I want to take this off my screen and jump into this as a part of our Black Power ideology session here. I'm going to bring up my second screen here. So let's jump into the Black Panther Party 10-point platform. And this is a precursor to how we'll go deeper into the conversation about their founding and etc. But basically, October 15, 66, the party laid out a 10-point platform, which were the guiding principles for self-determination in the community. And we're going to go through all 10 of them because in this Black Power course, the important part of this is understanding and defining what Black Power meant and what it will continue to mean. I'm not here to tell you like, this is what Black Power was. I'm going to walk you through all the different examples of what it was. And by the end, you'll be able to define it for yourself. So we looked at Stokely Carmichael and his version of what that meant. We looked at our other leaders and what that meant. Now we're going to look at the Panther ideology. And sometimes people looked at, as you see, Brother Bobby here and the light-skinned brother Huey, people just get caught up in the leathers and the guns and all of that and forget that there was a social, political, economic agenda that was the firm foundation of this revolutionary organization. So the number one plight was we want freedom. We want the power to determine our destiny in the Black community. 2, we want full employment for our people. 3, we want an end to the robbery by the capitalists of the Black community. 4, we want decent housing fit for the shelter of human beings. Sound a lot like the Declaration of Independence, doesn't it? We want 5, we want education for our people that exposes the true nature of the decadent American society. We want education that teaches our true role in history in present day society. 6, we want all Black men to be exempt from military service. 7, we want an immediate end to police brutality and the murder of our people. 8, we want freedom for all Black men held in federal, state, county, and city prisons and jails. 9, we want all Black people, when brought to trial, to be tried in a court, a jury of their peer group, meaning people from the Black community as defined in the Constitution of the United States. And 10, we want land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, and peace. Now, this manifesto, and we'll go deeper into it, I'll have Brother Bobby Seale give us a bit more nuance around it. But if you think about it, Dr. Huey P. Newton, and he wasn't doctor back then, but Huey P. Newton was he was the mind, he was the philosopher of the Black Panther Party. His studies and his perspective led him to be the one that looked into so many different ideologies, so many different revolutionary ideologies to come up with this basic platform for where the Panthers were able to use this to do several things. 1, to state who they were and what they believed. 2, recruit and find like-minded individuals that believed in that. And then most importantly, use it as a rallying cry to the work that they were doing. And we'll get more and more into that. But before we go any further, I read it. I'm going to send this out as a part of my follow-up, but I want Brother Bobby Seale to give us a better kind of rendition of it than I was just able to give. So I'm going to play this quick video right here. And I'm going to let Bobby Seale, co-founder of the Black Panther Party, tell us more about the 10-point platform. And this video specifically is from 1968. Huey P. Newton was in jail for the alleged murder of a police officer. and it was it was a Free Huey rally, and Brother Bobby was reminding the people, you know, why we did what we did and how we got to this point. So let me bring that up for you.
Your soul, your needs, your political desires and needs, because that is Huey's soul. When we first organized the Black Panther Party for self-defense, he would say, Bobby, he says, we're going to draw up a basic platform, just basic, that black people can read. He says, we don't want to go real elaborate with all these essays and dissertations and all this stuff, because the brother going to look at that and he can say, man, I ain't got time for that. I got to go see what I can do for myself. It's just a basic platform that the mothers who struggle hard to raise us, that the fathers who worked hard, that the young brothers in school who come out of school semi-illiterate, you say we want freedom, we want power to determine the destiny of our black community, full employment for our people. Number 3, we want housing fit, decent housing fit for shelter of human beings. Number 4, we want all black men to be exempt from military service. Number 5, we want decent education for our black people in our community that teaches us the true nature of this decadent racist society, and to teach black people and our young black brothers and sisters their place in society, because if they don't know their place in society and in the world, they can't relate to anything else. Number 6, we want an end to the robbery by the white racist businessmen of black people and black people in their community. Number 7, we want an immediate end to police brutality and murder of black people. Number 8, we want all black men held in county, state, federal jails and prisons to be released because they have not had a fair trial, because they've been tried by all white juries, and that's just like being tried in Germany being a Jew. Number 8, we want black people, number 9, when brought to trial, to be tried by members of their peers. And a peer being one who comes from the same economic, social, religious, historical, and racial background. If the United States government and the courts and the local courts did this, they would have to choose black people from the black community to sit up on the jury. They'd have to choose some of them mothers who've been working 20 years in Miss Ann's kitchen scrubbing floors like my mother done done. They have to choose some of them hard-working fathers. They have to choose some of those brothers who stand on the block out there wondering where they're going to get a gig. They're going to have to choose these black people. And number 10, he would say, let's just summarize it. We want housing, we want clothing, we want education, we want justice, and we want peace. This is a basic platform. In case you never knew it or not, of all the things that you've heard in the press, of all the derogatory statements that's been made in the press about Brother Huey P. Newton and I, of all these derogatory statements to guide you away from seeing this basic platform that Huey was talking about for his own people. We have to learn to look through the white press. We have to learn to see what's going on. Now, out of this platform, Huey P. Newton realized that it was necessary for us to start working on these points, these 10 points practically. Remember number 7? We want an immediate end to police brutality and murder of black people. This is very, very important. And here, whether you know it or not, is where you start dealing with the black revolution. When Huey says every black man put a shotgun in your home, and once we let the man know, say, look, we armed from block to block, and we're going to patrol you from our windows. And we're not going to have you brutalizing none of our people in the streets. Do you realize what kind of power black people have then? Because you begin to neutralize that police force, because them cops going to start riding shaky and scared. In fact, we're in a position then to demand that they withdraw from our community because they occupy our community just like a foreign troop occupies territory. Very important to understand. We hate cops beating black people over their heads and murdering them. That's what we hate.
I'm gonna stop my share there. For I don't want no copyright against me. That was all for educational purposes, but that was a really good example of the basis for what the Black Panthers were. People saw the guns, people saw the leathers, people saw the confidence, they saw the fearlessness, and some forgot we're here to serve our community against who they deem to be the enemy of theirs at that moment, which we saw in the Kerner Commission report, which we saw in the riots, which we saw in all the history we came through. That was an issue. And so, it's a misnomer that the Panthers were, thugs with guns. When really these were, especially the leadership, intellectuals, people who, moved through so many different ideologies, Nation of Islam, all the way to, Leninism and Marxism and socialism, looking for the ingredients that would give the Black folks here in America an opportunity to find that freedom that we've always been looking for. So that's definitely something that I want to, center this conversation around, and we'll continue to come back to it as we tell the story of the Panthers moving forward. But for today, our Black Power ideology was, deemed through and seen through the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense and their 10-point platform and program. We haven't even got to all the good stuff yet. So as we move forward in our discussion, in the 10-point platform and program was broken into two parts: what we want and what we believe. What we want was, we want this. What we believe was why, and it provided the context needed to set that basis. So as you think about this version of Black Power, as ambitious as things sound, those were basic, inalienable rights that you thought you got as just being a U.S. citizen, that they had to demand, over 100 years after, 1780, 200 years after the American Revolution and when the Constitution was written. So to want those things and to embody those things meant a lot. All right. So as we talked about the revolutionary kind of time, and this fits into the Black arts movement as well, there was kind of being pulled into multiple directions, but for all intent and purposes of this conversation, we'll talk about two. We'll talk about the revolutionary nationalists against the cultural nationalists, not even against, or the cultural nationalists. So the revolutionary nationalists, like the Panthers, they advocated for an armed struggle. They were anti-capitalist. People always wondered, why did they go so far in their ideology to be, Marxists or Leninists or all these other? Well, they felt that under the system that oppressed us, there was no coming out of that. So you couldn't use capitalism for bad and use it for good in their perspective at that time. They also believed in revolution, a total change of society. As at that same time, a lot of African countries, third world countries, in the Latino third world, where people were using these philosophical basis to overthrow governments and take back control of land. International solidarity with other liberation movements. That's why you always saw, especially when later in the story, when we figure out what happened to Eldridge Cleaver, when he left, he was going to Vietnam, he was going to China, he was going to the Panthers and others were going to Cuba, going back to Africa to figure out how they were able to do those things and tie those bonds as comrades in the struggle against the capitalist society that we all happen at that time to be victims of, some still today. There was a emphasis on class struggle and anti-imperialism, which brought, Black folks together with the radicals and the third world movements. Now, on the other side of this coin was the cultural nationalists, people who are focused on, I should have did this like a Venn diagram where a lot of them kind of fit in the middle, because that's how this was focused on cultural pride, African identity, community self-determination through cultural renewal. So you would see on one end some of my favorites. We talk about Stokely Carmichael, changed his name to Kwame Ture. You talk about Leroy Jones, who changed his name to Amiri Baraka. So you saw people say, you know what, we need to take on our African lineage, our African heritage. You even saw in the end of Malcolm's life, he said, you know what, I'm going overseas. I'm connecting more with the motherland. Call me El Hash Shabazz. And so, people taking on the name of a culture that we were removed from. And a lot of the Black arts movement and the revolutionary kind of struggle, they both participated in this. But one thing that made Huey and the Panthers a bit different is they felt their cultural connection was a Black one for Black people with a Black background. So while you may have seen dashikis and afros and you changing your name on one side, well, we're gonna wear leathers, we're gonna wear berets, we're gonna do it a different way. We're gonna be blackety black. And leave some of that other stuff for y'all to do, speaking from the Panthers perspective. But they both had a rejection of well, no, they didn't. Let me slow down. They both had art, education, culture, and politics as primary tools to navigate. So when you think about how these things coexisted, it was very kind of like today. You find your place in the struggle and you live there. So that's kind of where it was pulled from. You would even notice this in the Black arts movement. Some were more revolutionary, fiery, looked at politics as the weapon. Others said, you know what, it's our art and it's our ability to connect to something bigger than ourselves, the motherland, and that's where our power comes from. So that's the interesting part of kind of where we are in that regard. And so, right here, Black Power in Context, Core and SNCC. So I wanted to have this conversation because this is an interesting point, and I mentioned it last week, and I wanted to kind of flesh it out a bit more, but in the context of the Panthers. So during the early civil rights movement, organizations like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, they were civil rights 100. They believed in nonviolence. They believed in nonviolent direct action through protest. They was with the Dr. King philosophy, and they got a lot out of it. But as time changed, Stokely Carmichael took over SNCC, which John Lewis, civil rights legend, a politician, led SNCC up until that point. But when Stokely took over, it was a change. Even wanting to, and then who came after him, H. Brown, and we'll get more into that later. But Stokely said, you know what, in short, this organization need to change. He was very disillusioned with what happened during the Mississippi Freedom Summer. And he went to say, you know what, we don't even need to organize around Democrats no more. We need to have our own independent political party so we can elect people who have our interest in heart. And if you look up the Atlanta campaign, they got behind Julian Bond, who was running for a state legislature in the state of Georgia, and all of that story. So they were moving deeper into Black politics. SNCC, if you look at the logo, it was a black and a white hand holding hands and saying we're in this with unity. You get to the late 60s, they like, look, man, it may be better off for y'all to be a part of y'all struggle. Y'all go organize rural Mississippi. We'll organize rural Black Mississippi, and we'll meet in the middle. And so, really taking that on. Stokely found himself, we'll talk about this later too, getting affiliation. His star power grew, got affiliated with the Black Panthers, and then as COINTELPRO came running after him. So after a while, he leaves SNCC with this, radical perspective. And H. Brown, if you know anything about the, revolutionaries go, H. Brown, especially from a rhetoric perspective, and I'll play some of his video in the coming of classes. He took over. And by that time, the revolution was, or Black Power wasn't so much in play. He ended up getting caught up and headed to prison. And then you had Stokely Carmichael leaving the country after being, blackballed by COINTELPRO and informants. So SNCC changed, CORE changed. Congress of Racial Equality was another one of those blue blood, big six civil rights organizations. They made the change from James Farmer to who led the Freedom Rides, and we talked about that last class, to Floyd McKissick, who brought that same kind of energy Stokely was bringing. Said, we're going to stop this integration and stuff. We're going to work more on Black power. We're going to affiliate with things with a Black intent and use our people to make these movements. Support for against Vietnam, support for the urban rebellions and community control, which for both of these organizations led to a decline in membership, COINTELPRO infiltration, and eventually through internal conflicts, ending of the organizations as we knew them. So we started to see this change in these civil rights organizations, but you still got organizations like the SCLC, which Dr. King was the leader of, who was under the leadership of Reverend Abernathy at that time, still doing civil rights kind of things. You had NACP, who was real busy around this time in school desegregation, and we'll talk about that later, because the 70s was a fight for school desegregation through the courts like we've never seen. And then also holding the government accountable to the things that those civil rights laws said. So you got a chance to see the movement kind of change, but some of those big six civil rights organizations went one way and the other ones went the other way. Okay. Any questions, put it in the chat. Anything like that, let's talk about it. So now I want to move forward and talk about the Black Arts Movement, or where we are in our story in the Black Arts Movement. So the Black Arts Movement was a time of a lot of different things. Let me take this down and kind of riff for a minute. In our time here in this country, I was talking about African American folks, art has always been our way to attain a freedom that maybe we didn't have in our society, through the fine arts, painting, sculpting, to literature and poetry, through music and dance, in all the many ways that we express ourselves. We call ourselves the culture. We set it up. Jazz, blues, hip hop, rock, funk, literary endeavors, poetic endeavors. And I like to connect two kind of entities together. One, the Harlem Renaissance, the new Negro of the 1920s, who grew up post World War I, who may have even served in World War I, who had the ability to get an education, who had the ability to become a talented 10th, and saw the world in a different way. So Harlem and the Harlem Renaissance, and that also Renaissance was happening in other places, in Chicago, in Detroit, in Philadelphia, in Atlanta, a lot of different places. Renaissance were happening during that time, but Harlem being New York, and we talked about this in the last class, gets all the notoriety, but Chicago was just as a burgeoning Black cultural metropolis during that time as well. And so that was one of the first times that we were able to express ourselves through literature, through poetry, through plays, and not being just stuck in a conventional kind of agrarian kind of expression. And so that was a time, along with the new Negro ideology, saying, no, we ain't them old Negroes. We want to vote. We want to have a community. We want to have businesses. We want to have all these things. Fast forward 50 years to the 40 years to the 1960s and 70s, you had another Renaissance happening. And that Renaissance was happening around Black power and the Black aesthetic. During the early 60s, the late 50s and the early 60s, we were trying to show our Americanism through integration and amalgamation. I won't say amalgamation. I will say amalgamation. I won't say assimilation. I'll say amalgamation. We wanted to show that we want to be a part of society, but we still bring the sauce as well. You get to this era, you didn't see that as much anymore. I want you to see I'm Black. I talk different. I walk different. I wear my hair different. My clothes are different. And that's when we're talking about the revolutionary nationalists versus the cultural nationalists. So the Black Arts Movement is known to be like the sister of the Black Arts Movement, the intellectual and creative side of the Black art of the Black Power movement. And so I would like to center it in Amiri Baraka, but I even said earlier, if Amiri Baraka is known as the father of the Black Arts Movement, then Sonia Sanchez is the mother of the Black Arts Movement. But when you think about it, I like to think about this more in like literature terms. So I think about the book Black Pride by Donald Lee, or Think Black by Donnell Lee, or Black Fire by Amiri Baraka and Larry Neal. Larry Neal is the man, and we'll talk about him more in the class when we talk specifically around the Black Arts Movement, was the one who started to define what the Black aesthetic was, how our art differentiated itself, and how it needed to be different to express what we bring to the table. So, we weren't trying to go mainstream with this. We don't want everything to look like the Mona Lisa. We wanted to look like, the person from our community and our perspective. And so, in the long history of our expression, we had to find a way to continue to build an artistic basis that not only was appealing to us, but also had a political and a social meaning as well. So when you think about people in that lineage, you start to think about people like, and this is over time, you start thinking about people like Langston Hughes, famous poet, Zora Neale Hurston, W.E.B. Du Bois, and his perspective. You start to think about Contine Cullen, Richard Wright, Gwendolyn Brooks, Lorraine Hansberry, artists like Aaron Douglas and Augusta Savage, Jacob Lawrence. And then even more contemporarily, you start thinking about Richard Wright, Baldwin. You start to think about all of these voices that led to where we were in that time as far as looking for an identity, our own identity into the music. You even saw it in the music. You saw one of my heroes, Berry Gordy, look at a very assimilationist, amalgamationist perspective to say, we want to fit in, we want to sell to everybody, we want to make the sound of young America. And you saw the next generation or next iteration of that, James Brown saying, "Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud, I ain't scared of it." So you saw it everywhere. So to make a long story short, one thing that really got the Black Arts movement moving in New York was because Harlem and Brooklyn were exploding, just like some of these other places we talked about. In 1964, well, back up a little bit. The Great Migration brought Black folks north from the South. They ended up in cities. And in these cities, you had a clash between these new Black folks showing up, the current Black folks that's there, and the white folks that was living there too. And so in Philly, Harlem, Brooklyn, Rochester, 1964, riots ensued. Leroy Jones, at the time, who would later be Amiri Baraka, and his first wife, Hetty Jones, they had their own indie publications, Totem Press, The Floating Bear, The Union Press, and they were, producing the stuff that they were doing, the writings, the poetry, the literature. At that time, Amiri Baraka was very taken aback in a good way by Allen Ginsberg and what they were doing in the beatnik movement. Archie Shepp, who was a musician during that time, was a part of those kind of political conversations and figuring out how we could have these discussions and move forward. Ralph Ellison, who was one of a great Black writer, he had a problem with the idea of Amiri Baraka and the Black Arts movement saying, you don't have to do all that. Art is art, and let it be art, and let the politics be the politics. But they wanted to see something else move forward. And so after Malcolm X passed, Amiri Baraka left the village and he came down to Harlem, where he started BARTS, I'm gonna mess it up, I always do, the Black Arts and Repertory Theater and School. And that's why they call him the father. He built this first school and theater and cultural expression hub, and across the country, they start blowing up everywhere. Detroit, and we'll talk really about Detroit's and its role. What up, though? Its role in the Black Arts movement. Chicago and its role in the Black Arts movement. Houston and Atlanta, just to name a few down south, and then California out west. These cultural hubs were popping up because, like I said, this wasn't just in one place. One people wanted freedom, and that was it. No, these things were bubbling up among all the Black communities because we all were dealing with some of these same issues and looking to find a solve for them. And so in 1963, Baraka wrote Blues People, which was an ode to blues and jazz music and how those genres and music art forms were created through the Black expression and how they were ours and they weren't a part of popular culture. At that same time, a year later, one of his finest works was The Dutchman, 1964. And we may be able to watch a clip of that next week. And at the same time, you had Abby Lincoln and Artie Shepp organizing these young ladies, Cultural Association for Women of African Heritage. Maya Angelou was one of the revolutionaries in that time. and they ended up disturbing a UN meeting over some things that was going on that they didn't want to see. So even, you saw all of these Afro-American revolutionaries using their art, using their body, using their mind to move the art forward. So Malcolm was assassinated. Bart's came up, and while it was there, it was a very important part of the community. But due to COINTELPRO, due to funding, due to the internal battles, it didn't last long. So you had the school come, the school go. But while it left, it opened the doors for other opportunities for others to get other things going as well. Over that time, you see him also leave New York and go back to Newark. And he was in Newark when the riots took place and started to build a similar thing down there that was going on in New York. And we'll get more and more into his work as we move forward. But I want to just kind of bring us along with that as it's moving forward. So you got the Panthers moving forward, and we'll get deeper into that. You got the Black Arts Movement moving forward. You got the civil rights organizations all in this same time, moving forward. So when I showed you that timeline last week, all these things are happening concurrently, but aren't necessarily connected. Just because Amiri Baraka started a school here in New York, that did or didn't have a basis on what was going on with the Panthers out in Oakland or what was going on in Detroit. So I'm trying to tell the story as we go, that it was just a bubbling and a rumbling in our people from east to west of these Black Power revolutionary activities happening that weren't necessarily connected, but ended up being connected because they were all comrades in the struggle. So I'm going to leave the Black Arts Movement there, and I'm going to move forward in the Panthers. I've been really excited to tell these stories around the Black Panthers and their plight. Honestly, it was the work of the Black Panthers and the history of the Black Panthers that helped me intellectually find my footing. There was a time, in life where I wasn't the best student. And I got my act together late in high school, and it was due to me finding the work of African American studies in general and the Black Panther specifically that really lit a fire in me and got me understanding and taking advantage of my studies in undergrad. So brother Huey and brother Bobby, they did a really good job of taking their time when they started this organization. Bobby was older than Huey was, and out in Oakland, you had it's like Biggie said, either you're slaying crack rock or you got a wicked jump shot. You went to college or you went to work or you found your way through. So to make a long story short, these brothers ended up, they kept meeting each other along the way as they were getting together with different organizations who were doing some of this community work, some of this intellectual stuff, some of this Black Power stuff. And so they ended up finding each other, missing each other, finding each other, missing each other, came together at one point, said, you know what, you seem like somebody I can get down with, saying the other way. And they started the Black Panthers on the back of the 10-point platform and program. One of the most important parts that Brother Huey wanted to get across was the organization was not racist. They're for all power to all people. And what they really wanted to see is the stop of violence from police against Black folk in the community. That was number 7 on the list, but that was the first thing they went for. And they said, we're gonna do it through self-defense, and we're gonna do it through using our Second Amendment rights, and at the time, the California rights to hold and carry arms and defend ourselves, one, and then use the law to patrol the police. So when he was recruiting his buddies, the first ones to come along, he's saying, look, this is what we about to do, man. We got to stop this. We ain't got to be afraid. We ain't got to be scared. We're using the law on our side, and that's what we're going to do. They didn't want to be seen as street thugs or people who didn't have it going on. So they said, we need a uniform. And our uniform is going to be black slacks, iron powder blue shirt or black, turtleneck, black leather, and a beret. So when you saw these brothers, you saw these, fly brothers looking good in their uniform. They wanted to reduce fear in the community and raise the consciousness. Because at that time, cop brutalized you. He just brutalized you. You're dead, and ain't nothing you can do about it. And they wanted to see that end. They built their intellectual basis on civil rights, on Black studies, and on ideology. They were reading Frantz Fanon. Mao Zedong. They were reading Che Guevara, Malcolm X, Robert Williams from the Deacon of Defense. So these weren't just these street corner guys with nothing to lose. Huey was in college. Bobby was in college studying engineering. Huey was studying philosophy and would later go on, to go study law school and end up getting his PhD. So you're talking about people who. So when we talk about the black arts and the Black Power movement, we're talking about intellectuals here. Stokely Carmichael went to Howard University, was the president of SNCC. H. Rap Brown went to Howard University, was a part of SNCC. Huey and Bobby went to Merritt College out in Oakland. And as we get further down the line, these were people who were intellectuals, people who looked at political science, people who looked at philosophy and said, we thought civil rights was the way, but now we found through others who gained their freedom this way, this is the way to do it. So, this was their intellectual approach. So, when you're a startup, you got to find a way to fund yourself. So what they would do is they got, being so close to UC Berkeley, they got, a ton of the red books from Mao Zedong, I'm gonna say that wrong, which was a communist revolutionary, and they would get them for a small price and sell them for double. So after a couple of weeks, they made $850. That's way back then in 1966. So that's how they funded the organization. They had a fellow comrade from the Asian struggle provide them with their first couple guns. And you'll see more in my office hours this week about the man who armed the Black Panthers and what his legacy ended up being. And so, they started recruiting from the local community, buddies, people who felt them. And we'll talk more about their membership practices as we move forward. And their claim to fame were these Panther patrols. And these patrols where they would get in the car, all decked out in a uniform. They would find where they had the police radio in the car. They would find out where somebody was getting harassed, and they would show up. And they would show up and follow the letter of the law. And they would show up with guns and say, the cop like, you can't be here. They say, well, Huey, the law says we can be 20 feet away from a situation, and we 25 feet away, so we can watch this and monitor this thing, having their guns out. Well, you can't have that gun. Yes, I can, because according to the Second Amendment and law, this, and that, I can have this gun as long as it ain't this, as long as it ain't that. Showing bravado and showing a courage, talking to the cops, where usually when the cop get to you, like, okay, I'm gonna put my head down and go. And so people in the community seeing this, like, damn, these brothers got it going on. And so they did this, and these patrols, they would happen, and it would catch the officers off guard, because they used to just be in the big bully. I say boo and everybody run. Well, they said boo, and you found some people who stood up to him. So as they started these patrols, the community started to see them, and it started to legitimize them in the community. But you still had the civil rights guard like, no, that's not how you do it. You're supposed to go out there and you peacefully protest and you economically boycott and you do it that way. That's how we got here. Because we're talking about young guys. We're talking about people from 16 to 25 who wanted to do things a bit differently. And so, while the patrols were going, you had, the first kind of situation between the cultural nationalists and the revolutionary nationalists. Huey and Bobby and his boys is like, no, you get it popping. You meet, which like Malcolm said, you meet force with force. Now, the cultural revolutionaries will say, you talk, but we intellectuals, we want to talk about Mother Africa and Ubuntu Pusabe and all those kind of things. And I'm saying that in justice to kind of get a point across. And so, to make a long story short, Betty Shabazz was coming into town, Malcolm X's widow, to do an interview with Ramparts, who Eldridge Cleaver then worked for. And we'll get to Brother Eldridge as we move forward. And they were working with some cultural nationalists. I won't name them, but they did go on to start the Black Studies program at Merritt College, the first in the country. And so, to make a long story short with that, they went up to Oakland. They went up to San Francisco. The interview happened. They found out that the cultural revolutionaries, who were also called Black Panthers at the time, didn't load their weapons and were afraid to have a confrontation when it happened. They ran out the back door, and Huey and them standing up doing their same gig that they do. I can do this within the law. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. Cocking my gun and saying, if you touch me, I'm going to shoot you. It's in my rights to do. It's in the laws to do. And they end up getting into it with this organization and took the name and said, we're the Panthers. Y'all got to be something else. And they moved forward in doing that. Eldridge Cleaver, who was, a rock star at that time, in that, he had a bid in prison. While in prison, he published his journals from prison that called Soul on Ice, and I'll have that in the link as well in the follow-up, which went on to be a bestseller, critically acclaimed in the New York Times. He saw what they was doing and said he wanted to align with them, and him coming to the party really brought the fire, because you had a celebrity, so to speak, a rock star giant joining. And when he came in as the Minister of Information, he brought his what I don't say he brought Kathleen Cleaver, who they later married. He brought her in, and she was appointed the comm secretary, the first woman to have that role in the Panthers. And it started this, elders legitimized them to the Black intellectuals, to the white left intellectuals. And he had a way with words. He had a way with rhetoric. He was a handsome brother. He had swag. He had all of that. And so they would say Huey is the visionary. Bobby was the personality, who I played the video of, and Eldridge was the credibility. So with this now, you got a couple of things happening. As the story of the Panthers is starting to get out, and as these officers are having this problem with them, the laws where you could carry a gun, an unloaded gun, with you, as long as it isn't loaded in the car in a public place. Well, these Panther patrols and these exhibitions caught the alarm of the power structure, and they went to change the law. And a representative in the state legislature called Mumford, he's called for a Mulford Act. His name was Mulford. The Mulford Act, which prohibited the rights to carry a gun in public places. So this law sought to do two things. One, bring back the status quo where brothers in the community aren't allowed to defend themselves. And two, it would render useless or render bankrupt the Panthers using these guns to show their power and their intent to protect themselves and their communities. Even the NRA got on the side of gun control. When have you ever heard the NRA on gun control? They even said, yeah, this might be right here. This might be what we want to do. So I'll fast forward. It was an issue as they were building their momentum. People start calling on them to hold these police accountable. So it was a situation that went on in Richmond, not too far away from Oakland, where a young man named Denzel Dowell was brutalized and killed by police. They called Huey and the Panthers down. The Panthers came down there and did an investigation, and was poking holes through what the city said happened. And they sat down with the police chief, kind of like old Bull Connor, as we would talk about in the civil rights class. Sat down with him, and he said, well, if you got a problem with it, take it up with the state and get out of here. They said, you might be right about that. And so to petition and put a advocacy against the Mulford Act, the Panthers said, well, we about to go up to Sacramento, was the state capital, and we are going to, read this statement live on the stairs of the state capitol. They getting ready to go, and Huey like, bet, let's do this. And they like, well, we don't want you to go. They're like, why? Basically, I'm the leader of this motherfucker. I need to be going. They said, well, the pig don't know how many people we got. They don't know what our reach is. They don't know. If you here with us, they gonna think this is all we got. And so, make a long story short, Bobby took about 30 people up to on May 2nd, 1967. He took 30 Panthers up to Sacramento. 24 of them were armed. He brought 6 sisters with him. So you're talking about a whole coalition, decked out in their berets, in their Panther leathers, and they blacks with their shotguns ready to roll, or whatever guns they had. And so Bobby read Panther Mandate number 1 and on the steps. And let me get Panther Mandate number 1 up real quick. I thought I had it. Here we go. Hold on. I'm going to share my screen. You know what? I won't do that because the video isn't of high quality. But basically, it was a and I'll put it in the notes. It was a declaration against the Mulford Act, saying, you know, you want to keep the black folks, you know, broke, penniless, without a means to defend themselves, and it ain't right. So basically, they were doing political advocacy at that time. Huey gave explicit instructions not to go into the Capitol because he was the law guy. You know, he would spend his time in the law library understanding the nuances of the law. But he wasn't there. So Brother Bobby asked a journalist, "Hey, how you get to the visiting area we can look on and see what's going on down there?" He said, "Well, go to the left, sir." I'm not sure if he said sir. Panthers walk into the state capitol. They make a wrong turn and end up on the floor, which, you know, is a violation of law, unfortunately. And so from that, 27 of the Panthers were arrested, and the bail was set at $5K. And Eldridge Cleaver was given a travel ban for 2 months. But at that time, he had press credentials because he was with Ramparts. So he was straight. So in a couple months, they lifted his ban. But what this did was it did two things. One, it gave national exposure to the party. But two, it made them, you know, a target in not only local police eyes, but COINTELPRO eyes. And so, you know, I wanted to show kind of the stark difference between these two things. So let me show you this picture here. So this is what we remember, and this is what we see as a civil rights protest right here. I'm going to share my screen. I meant to do a side-by-side, but because I lost the day, I didn't do it. Let me show you this side-by-side here, or let me show you this image. You see this right here? This is the "We shall overcome. We shall over." This, you know, people got on suits. They locked in arms. They, you know, they in their Sunday's best. They organized. They ready to roll. They getting it popping. Now, let me show you a picture of what the Panthers was doing at the courthouse steps. And it's the picture, if you've been a part of my class, it's the picture that you can see in my in the flyer for the class. Now, this is the Panthers. This is the protest that the Panthers was doing up at the Capitol May 2nd, 1967. A little bit different, huh? A little bit different. Everybody in their uniform, everybody still peaceful, but they got them things and they ready to roll. Now, this stark image in and of itself was a turning point in American history. It was a turning point. We talked about how things were trending towards Black power. We talked about how art was moving there. Civil rights organizations were moving there. Cities were burning up and going on fire. This was like, oh my God, these brothers walked up in here doing this. We ain't gotta let the man knock us over the head no more. We can stand up, we can do that. Man, they lit on fire in a lot of different ways. In America, we love sensational things. They didn't know about the 10-point platform that we had, or that the Panthers had. They didn't read the Panther Mandate #1. All they saw was these brothers with guns at the Capitol. And so the press took it and ran with it, and turned the Panthers from a local organization that only Oakland was having problems with to a worldwide phenomenon. People want to start chapters around the country. It hit like wildfire. I say it's similar to, and we talked about this if you was with me in the second class, when the Greensboro 4 did their sit-ins, the first college student sit-ins, official college student sit-ins, and then over that year, or by the end of the month, it was sit-ins around the country. That's how the Panthers were. It was people starting Panther chapters who didn't even contact Brother Bobby, and we Panthers too. We all doing it. And the Panthers, the central office in Oakland, found a way to normalize membership, and we'll talk about that as we go forward. But this was a seminal moment. It brought attention, but it also brought the government. So it was a turning point for the Panthers. even to, so now we started to see a situation where Huey, who didn't go, had to raise funds, which would, you're gonna hear this for the whole rest of the time we talk about the Panthers. Panthers locked up for something either they did or they didn't do that was either legal or wasn't illegal, and somebody having to raise money to get them out. It was a strategy that the government used to bleed the Panthers' funds, and their power was to bleed them out through the legal system. So Huey was able to raise about $5,000 after this to post bail for those who could. A couple Panthers, including Brother Bobby, had to stay and serve 6 months for coming to the floor of the House at the state capitol. And it was from that point, the Panthers started October 1966. By May 67, this happened. Huey and Bobby weren't together on the streets again until 1971. So when we talk about it caught the attention of the government, and it caught the attention of the people. So you have, well, I'll get to that. I'll get to that in a moment. So in that, the Panthers started to, grow a little bit at home, and they opened their first office. January 1967, they opened their first office on Grove Street, which is now Martin Luther King Boulevard, not too far from Merritt College. And at that time, Merritt College was experiencing a cultural revolution. Poets, playwrights, musicians, artists. Remember, I kind of mentioned that with the Black Arts Movement. That's happening there at that college campus. And so that's bleeding over to the Panthers headquarters. And they having these fiery debates with these college kids and these intellectuals. And they're differentiating themselves and showing that this is something you want to be a part of. A space for thought, leadership, and debate. There was averaging about 20 people for these meetings that happened Monday nights and Wednesday nights and Saturday nights, and as they attempt to continue to recruit and I'll say this now, and I'll get into it more later as we talk about the expansion. Getting into the Panthers or being a part of the Panthers wasn't as easy as, you got a gun? Can I come? Okay, I'm here. I'm a Panther now. No, it was a 6-week process where you had political training and you had a reading list. You had rules and regulations you had to follow. You know what? Let me do this. Let me take a second. Let me back out of that story real quick. So let's look at the Panther reading list. The reading list was how they taught their political agenda that they were on. So if you look at this here, you saw the autobiography of Malcolm X, and this is what you had to read to become a member. Autobiography of Malcolm X. And if you didn't know how to read, you come to the Panther office, they'll help you do it. You go through these classes over this amount of time, you get through so much, and then it's an ongoing thing as you do to keep yourself tight. So the autobiography of Malcolm X, Frantz Fanon, A Wretched of the Earth, Kwame Nkrumah, I Speak Freedom, The Lost Cities in Africa, Nat Turner Revolt, The American Negro Revolts, Negroes Before the Mayflower, et cetera, et cetera. Look at this full list of books that they recruited with. So it wasn't just you come here and you get a gun, you come here and you fight the power. No, we're here setting a political and a philosophical agenda that we're going to use to impact our community in a positive way. You also had the rules and regulations of being a Panther. Let me pull these up real quick. And I think this is so important because for so long, it was misconstrued about who the Panthers were. But I will also say this. If you ever seen an image of the it's a number, it looks like a 6 or a 9, depending on where you're standing. Now, depending on where you were, depending on your perspective, the Panthers was a lot of different things. In the beginning of the documentary of the Vanguard, it talk about an old African proverb where it says the person who was blindfolded, they all touched this elephant. One touched the tusk, so they thought it was something, a warrior, like a spear. One touched the body and they felt rough, like it was like some kind of texture. One felt the tail and they thought it was a whip. So depending on your vantage point, the Panthers were a lot of different things. And we'll talk about it because they did explode. And it was everybody who started a chapter wasn't necessarily doing it for the 10-point platform and the reading list and the books. Some of them were seeing it as a way just to fight the power, and I understand that. But basically, the rules were this: no party member can have narcotics or weed in their possession while doing party work. Any Panther or any party member found shooting narcotics will be expelled from the party. No party member can be drunk while doing party work. No party member can violate the rules relating to office work, general meetings of the party, and meetings of the Black Panther Party anywhere. No party member will use, point, or fire a weapon of any kind unnecessarily or without or accidentally at anyone. No party member will join any armed army outside of the Black Liberation Army, and we'll talk about them later in the conversation. No party member can have his weapon in his possession while drunk or loaded off narcotics or weed. No party member can commit any crimes against other party members or Black people at all. You can't steal or take from people, not even a needle or a piece of thread. When arrested, Black Panther members will only give their name and address and will sign nothing. Legal aid must first be understood by all party members. The 10-point platform and program of the Black Panther Party must be known and understood and recited. Party communications must be national and local. The 10-10-10 program must be known by all the Panther members and also understood. All financial officers will operate under the jurisdiction of the Minister of Finance. Each person will submit a report of daily work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you had people, it wasn't just you come here and you fight the power. This was an organization that they were building. The 8 points of attention: speak politely. You don't think about this when you think of the Panthers, right? Speak politely, pay fairly on what you buy, return everything you borrow, pay for anything you damage, do not hit or swear at people. Do not damage property of or a corpse of the poor or oppressed masses. Do not take liberties with women, which, you know, things happen and they had to deal with that in the party as well. If you ever take captives, don't harm them or treat them with ill intent. The 3 rules of discipline: obey orders, especially as it coming from central office or leadership. Do not take anything from anybody, and in turn everything captured to an enemy, or in turn everything captured from an attacking enemy. So these were, you know, some basic guidelines and laws that the Panthers had to adhere to from the central office. But as fast as it grew, the many different needs of many different communities, this was a part that may not have been always held up. You know, one part, and I'll get to this, I'll talk about it now, but I'll get to it a lot later. Any chapter that wanted to, or anybody who wanted to start a chapter, first they had to come to Oakland. They had to come serve. They had to get indoctrinated with how we do things. And then you sent Panthers back there as you could to institute those things so you can get it started right. As it started to move, and as leaders started to get imprisoned, and as things started to go haywire, you started to see more chapters rise up, and they didn't know maybe what all they were getting into. They just saw the guns, they saw the berets, they saw the leathers, and they saw the bravado, and that's what got them, and not necessarily everything. So as the COINTELPRO and the government was started to infiltrate, it wasn't as hard as one might think, because you might be dealing with a brother across the country who got no idea who Huey was like that. They ain't read all them books. They ain't do all the work. They didn't do all that. They just knew what they was there for. So as we talk about how the demise eventually came, how rapidly they grew as a part of that conversation. So back to the story, you know, as they got the office rolling, the Panthers would still continue their patrols. And, you know, before the bill passed, the Mulford Act, they still were able to hold guns and do the things that they were doing. First member of the party was Little Bobby Hutton. Little Bobby Hutton was a mentee of Bobby Seale, and, you know, 16, 17 years old. And he was the first real Panther casualty out in Oakland too. They had the first sister to join the party was Sister, I forget her name, Green. I know that's her last name. And she joined as a young child, a youngin, maybe 17 years old, and fought the power as well. It also helped with the newspaper. Let's see. So other parts of the party membership where you follow the rules, you got a political training, arms training, and the service. You gave meals to the kids. You was a crossing guard. You did all these things, Panther patrols, after school programs. You led classes. You did things. You gave out food. You did stuff in the community. So I think even we get a misnomer. Some of the programs that you see that the government eventually took on, these were Panther programs. Another big part of the organization was the Panther news service, and I want to go to that here in the deck. We can see a look at it. Actually, no, I'm gonna just share my screen and show it. Let me remove this. So I want to share my screen here and show this newsletter. And I think this is cooler than just, talking about it. So let's see. This is the second Panther edition on 5/15, which is a special day for me. It's my wife's birthday. But this is what it looked like. You had, and this is straight off the presses. This is, wait, I thought I had the whole thing on here. Yeah, I do. Go to page 1. So these revolutionaries from out of Oakland, not only were they patrolling police and teaching classes and recruiting people, they needed a means by which to communicate. And you had Eldridge Cleaver. So Eldridge Cleaver, who was a journalist or a writer in his own, helped, get the paper going. So the Panther paper, and I'm going to send this out as well. I just wanted to show kind of what it looks like as we get ready to continue this conversation and wrap up here. So the Panther Community News Service, they sold it for 25 cents. It cost them $10 to distribute and to produce. It offered an opportunity for youth to make some legit money as party members, or not as delivery boys and girls, probably more boys. And so it netted 5 cents in profit for everyone that was sold. Early in the process, before all the police attention, local businesses would advertise. It became a medium to write about various issues and share solutions. At that point, when they were still growing, they only had 6 full-time members. And so the first issue came out May 2nd, 1967. And there were other radical papers during that time. People were cooking up. But what made this one different was it taught courage. It gave practical legal advice. And it represented the brothers and sisters on the block. That's one thing I didn't really get a chance to talk about. So as Huey was very multifaceted in that he was a college student. He was a fraternity member, Phi Beta Sigma fraternity he was a part of. But he also had a longing and a yearning to keep the revolutionary and the political work in the hands of the brothers on the block as well. So his main thing was, well, if the Muslims got the people they got, the civil rights people got the church folks, SNCC got the students, we want to take a little bit of the students, but we also want the brothers in the block. Nobody's accounting for the brothers on the block, the brothers and sisters on the block. We want to make sure what we doing is easy enough for them to understand. So while I'm reading this stuff over the head, I want to bring them in and get them to see it from my perspective as well. Eldridge Cleaver was the first editor, and David Du Bois, the grandson of W.E.B. Du Bois, ended up being the last one. So the production was done by hand. You saw what I showed you. They had T-square rulers, scissors, mat knives, screens, a press down type, drawing boards, and a few typewriters and some tape. So they were really putting this together out of the mud. Emory Douglas, who was the minister of culture, he was the one responsible for all those images. So, he was a, as we talk about people using their art for politics, he was the one that really gave rise to the images of the Black Power struggles through the Panther lens. So he always drew the Panthers as, strong and powerful and mighty, and the oppressor is small and feeble. He was the one that came up with the image of the pig. So you took him from all fours to a cop hat and a badge. And so Emory Douglas, who was a revolutionary that really did a good job of painting that picture, him and along with the sister, I keep forgetting her name, last name Green, who was the young sister. She was also one of the ones who served in that regard as well. His art would make its way to city buildings. It was the first kind of graffiti of the time, if you will, that hip hop made famous later. They would print them up and put them in Panther offices, put them in buildings, put them behind things, put them in front of things. It was his art that moved that thing forward. Another thing that made his contributions very unique is he was there. When they went to Sacramento, he was there. Free Huey rallies, he was there. Panther patrols, he was there. So he was able to give the artistic expression of what all these things were. The articles inside the paper were meant to be concise and to the point. But they did have targets. They ain't had no love for the police. They ain't had no love for the cultural nationalists like that. And they didn't have no love for what they would call the bourgeoisie, who we would call the talented 10th, the people who had a little bit of opportunity. They would call them the bootlickers, people who were black and not using their power and their authority to help the people, but to benefit themselves. By March 1969, and that's going way in the story, they had 26 locations selling the paper, and between 69 and 70, they were selling over 100,000 a week. Now, they did have barriers as the police and government started to have problems with the Panthers and what they was doing. You know, the press would say, well, we can't do this unless you have some union membership. So they would say, we'll send a couple Panther people who work on the paper to get some union certification. Some of the printers were receiving bomb threats and didn't want to work with them no more. Some of the papers would be wet, late, or not delivered to where they were supposed to be. And so, you know, they faced barriers as they move forward. David Hilliard, who was also one of the local Panthers, who was the chief of staff, said, you know, the tool was used to inform and to convert. Anybody who got their hands on that paper, you had a potential new member that's going to come through that door and be able to serve the community. And so there was a time. Well, let me pause there. Where are we on time? Okay, we looking pretty good. So I'm gonna go through the rest of this, and then we'll pick it up next week. So I call this part growth. Well, see, I passed a little bit. We talked about early membership. We talked about Sacramento and national exposure. We talked about Eldridge Cleaver. We talked about the news service. And now I want to talk about, here it is. More power, more problems. So as you started to grow, or as you start to grow locally and nationally, and we'll talk more about that as we move forward in the conversation. You know, there was a proposed merger between SNCC. Remember, I talked about SNCC earlier, and the Panthers. And we'll talk about this as we move forward. You know, COINTELPRO was in overdrive. And we talked about the laws that allow for local collaboration with the feds as far as guns, military weaponry, surveillance, technology, all those things was at a full kind of tilt. But then you also had a lot of differing kind of people coming together. Panthers, you know, Eldridge Cleaver served in some time in jail, prison. So did Huey for small offenses. You had SNCC coming, who were more, if they would have went to jail, it would have been because they was a part of nonviolent protests. So you had more college students. And so you're trying to bring these brothers together, and just how, you know, things happen. You know, you can't see eye to eye on everything, especially with COINTELPRO in the middle. So the proposed merger was, SNCC has the institution. They've been around. They got chapters all over the country. Huey and Bobby was like, well, if we get connected with them, we can establish and find a way to do our expansion the right way. So they just Panthers chapters popping up everywhere. Nah, we can do it through SNCC, and we can institute our 10-point program, our rules, our political education, our arms training through an organization that already has the means by which to do it. Well, through miscommunication, infiltration, and just kind of personalities, it didn't happen. But what they wanted to have, they wanted Stokely Carmichael to be the prime minister. So you had Brother Bobby was the chair of the organization. You had Brother Huey P Newton was the Minister of Defense. You had the Minister of Information with Eldridge Cleaver. They wanted the Prime Minister to be Stokely Carmichael. They want the Minister of Justice nationally to be H. Rat Brown. And we'll talk about him as we move forward. And they wanted James Foreman to be the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So this would have been, remember last class, we talked about how COINTELPRO said they didn't want any union among the Black revolutionary organizations. And to do that, you infiltrate, you lie, you cheat, you steal your way into making sure they don't come together. And that's basically what they did there. So while they weren't able to materialize that, H. Rat Brown, James Foreman, and Stokely Carmichael did come over to the Panthers, at least for a short time, and affiliated. The two organizations weren't able to merge. But Huey did give Panther Mandate number 2 that made Stokely Carmichael the field marshal. And Stokely Carmichael, he was the head of SNCC, and after he was done, he was hand in hand with H. Rat Brown. So after he left SNCC, H. Rat Brown took over SNCC, but they both were affiliated with the Panthers for a short time. So that's how that kind of came together. So as they started to grow as well, they wanted to find a way, they had the kids running around the community, man, forget the pig, F the pig, off the pig, but they weren't getting the kind of political leadership that they needed. So they started the Junior Panthers, 2 divisions of the Junior Panthers, 12 to 14 as you got ready to mature into the Panthers, and 8 to 12 as you were just the youngin' at the food program. And so they taught them Black history, application of revolutionary ideas. They end up adding traffic patrols to some of the service that they would do. They had busy intersections in Oakland where kids were getting hit. The government didn't want to move fast enough. The bourgeoisie didn't want to move fast enough. So they would go out there and do it. So you got full service in the community. You're dealing with the local police. You're dealing with the Mulford Act coming that's about to stop you from being able to hold the guns that made you popular in the first place. So the Panthers were starting to have to figure out, what was going on. So you saw a heightened tensions between the Panthers and the police went up, but the community and the police went down. So the police start pointing their eyes toward the Panthers and getting off the average everyday brothers, which was a blessing for the community, but a cursing for the Panthers. And so August 1967, the Mulford Act passed that said it was illegal to carry a gun in a public place, loaded or not. And so it basically made the Black community and the Panthers unable to protect themselves in public outside of in your home where you can carry it. So you can't do the patrols no more. You can't roll around with a gun that isn't loaded. That's a death sentence, riding around with the police, who are now emboldened by the federal government through the policies we talked about last week, and now COINTELPRO on their tail. So you're starting to see, so Huey's like, okay, we're going to have to pivot and we're going to have to kind of move this thing forward. So one thing that they did is they said, okay, we need to offer the pocket legal aid to our members. So now you can't have your gun, you can't do this, but you can still use your words. You still can do this, you can do that. So they started to implement that as they move forward. Eldridge staged that picture of Huey P. Newton sitting in the chair that went viral back in the day and made more people want to join, but also put a target on his back as well. And I want to end the conversation about the Panthers with this next quick story. So as the Panthers started to rise, the Mulford Act passed. You can't carry a gun. You're empowered. The government was empowering local police and COINTELPRO on their tail. And let's see, what is it here? 1967, late 67, a car pulls up behind Huey P. Newton and a buddy of his. Come to find out, it was one of the most gangster cops that they had in Oakland. And to make a long story short, a tussle ensued and a cop ended up dead. Huey ended up shot, and what we would know as the Free Huey movement started. And so now you're at your first kind of impasse between cops and the Black Panthers in Oakland, to where the tensions are at an all-time high, and now you playing the highest stakes game you can, because the leader of the movement, Huey P. Newton, is on trial for murder against a cop. And so now you're taking Huey off the streets, putting him behind bars. Brother Bobby is locked up and on his way out. Eldridge is now, is the face of it, and David Hilliard, who is the chief of staff, is starting to have to step up his role. In addition to the Huggins, in addition to Kathleen Cleaver, in addition to the rank and file brothers and sisters, the Emory Douglases, and all these other people. So now you're starting to get COINTELPRO about to move with full force. The Panthers are not at full force because now you got both of their leaders locked up, one coming out, one about to go in, and you're about to start this Free Huey movement that's going to set this political thing on fire. So I'm going to stop there for today, and I want to get ready to continue our conversation next week. So as we move forward, we're going to pick up from 1967 to Free Huey all the way into 1970, so we can see how COINTELPRO was fully activated, how the Panthers expanded, and how you started to see more and more COINTELPRO and police involvement with the Panthers in 1968. You see the death of Dr. King, and you get the declaration by J. Edgar Hoover, who was the head of the FBI and licensed the COINTELPRO program, that the Panthers were the biggest threat to the internal safety of the United States. So you're going to see that moving forward. We're also going to talk about the Black Arts Movement as it picked up, the anti-war movement as it was picking up, and where civil rights was headed as well. So next week we have a lot to talk about, kind of like how we did today. I want to just leave a moment for any questions that we have. Drop them in the chat if you have to. We talked about a lot today, but I think it was a lot of good content. We got into the Panthers, we got into their rise, and we got into where the first two big crossroads. One, the Mulford Act, where they couldn't hold the guns anymore. And then two, Huey shot, police dead, and now the Panthers are becoming public enemy number one. So moving forward, we're going to continue this conversation, but I also want to let us know we have some, starting, it's going to get a little dark here as far as seeing, how the government used all their power to, kind of bring the Panthers under subjection. But you also had the transition from soul music to funk music and what that brought. You saw the rise of Black TV. You saw shows like Soul Train. You saw shows like Sanford and Son, Good Times on TV. What's happening? Like that. You saw black exploitation movies and the arts outside of the Black arts movement start to take a step forward. The soundtracks that went along with them. You saw Black elected officials that we're going to talk about as well. The rise of Black business and Black education in the Black middle class during this time. So there's some other stories to tell as we get through this class. But next week is going to get a little dark around what happened to the Panthers. But we're going to sprinkle in a little good stuff to keep it fly as well. So I don't see any questions here. I definitely want to thank you for joining me again for another opportunity. We'll be back next Wednesday at our regular time. I know I'm going against college football, NFL, audience not knowing when I'm on. But if you sign up, if you're watching me, you saw me somewhere. You can go to my Facebook page or you can go to this YouTube page, leave me an inbox, and I can get you connected to the work. I appreciate your time today. This has been an amazing class. I can't wait to take you further along the journey with the Black Panthers and with all this other stuff I talked about. I think we hit our peak for tonight. I'll send out the follow-up so you can have a link to this lecture, the lecture notes with links to information like books, documentaries, YouTube clips, Wikipedia pages, other history, so you can pick what you liked out of this discussion and take it for yourself. Next week will be week 3. And in week 3, let's see, what's the title for week 3? Let me pull that up. It's our 4th time meeting, but week 3. I did it like college football, week 0, week 1, week 2. And then this one is week 3 as my laptop is loading here. Yep, the rise of the national focus and escalating repression on the party, Free Huey, the expansion to other cities, COINTELPRO. We'll talk more about Eldridge, Bobby, Fred Hampton in Illinois. We'll talk about the Chicago trial in 67. Of 1968. We'll talk about the Panther shootout with the police in 69. We'll talk about the rise of the Black arts movement, the anti-war movement. So we got a lot more on the plate to get. But I want to thank you for your time today. It's Dwayne Barnes, MPA. This is AAS 477. Black Power 1967 to 1968 to 1980, and we'll be deep into the late 60s and the early 70s next week. And see you then. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your energy and your enthusiasm. I appreciate you. See you next week. Peace.